friends, it's Christy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using Hello Bluebird's Bloomin' Happy Garden Party and Fall Banner Buddies. So I've stamped the images I'll be using on some Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. And even though two of the stamp sets that I pulled today to use are actually more of a springtime stamp set, I really wanted to create a fall card with these critters, so that's why I brought in the images from the third set, like all of those little leaves and acorns and the little bird that's holding the acorn. So I'm going to start coloring with my squirrel, and I wanted to do a red squirrel because those are my favorite. So I pulled out E11, E13, E15, E17, and E18. I'm actually not going to use the E11 right now. I ended up saving that. I wanted to use it on the face and belly, but I just ended up combining it with some different markers. So we're going to skip over that one for now. And I'm just starting with the body because these are a little bit of a larger image. I like to kind of break them down into sections if they are a bigger image, like him with his nice fluffy tail. So I prefer to color darkest to lightest. It just saves me from oversaturating the paper, and also it eliminates a couple of steps if you start darkest to lightest rather than starting lightest, building up to darkest, and then going back down to the lightest, as some people do. But it's whatever your preference is. So I laid in my shadows with that E18 first, and then blended that out with the E17. Then I used a little bit of the E15 and brought in a touch of the E13. The E13 was so minimal that you probably could skip it if you wanted to eliminate a marker and just use 3 tones on his fur. But I like that tiny little extra bit of highlight in there. I think the lighter your highlights are, the deeper your shadows look, and it just makes them stand out better. So I like it, but it's totally, again, up to personal preference. So once I had that, I wanted to add a little bit of this shade into some of my leaves. I wanted to go with really warm, kind of rusty fall tones for this card. So I wanted to have a bit of brown in my leaves, and it also gives me another place to add that shade so it's not only on the squirrel and he stands out too much. So now I'm going to use that E11 in combination with E000 and E00, and I'll use that for his face and belly like I said. Starting with that E11 up around his top part of his face and on the left edge of his belly, a little bit on the insides of his ears, and then I'm flicking out with the E00 and adding a little touch of that E000 in there as well. I'm going to color in the inside of the mouse's ears with these shades as well, and I should have done his tail and feet, but I forgot to do that, so I'll have to come back and get those later. But I'm also going to do the face of my little bird with these shades, and I'm going to color the main body of the worm. I will come back to him and add some more detail later, but I wanted to use this as kind of like a base layer on him. And then I'm going to switch combos for my mouse, and I'm going to combine W00 and W1 with some E70s. I'm using E70, E71, and E74. I really like this combo for mice, and I think it's such a gorgeous shade for fall. It turns into this beautiful grayish tone, like a gray and a beige mixed together, and I just think it makes them look almost velvety. I can't explain it exactly, but I just think this combo is so stunning, and every fall especially I really am drawn to it. So for the mouse, I started with the E74, laid in a little bit of shadow with that, not too much because I didn't want him to get too dark, but again, having that darker shadow really does make the rest of the image pop. Blended out with the E71 and then the E70, And then I came in with a little W1 only on the face and the belly and the little paws. And I did throw a little bit on the feet and tail. I thought maybe I wouldn't have to pull out those E11 and such markers again and could get away with it, but I didn't like it. So I will come back and add those in just a bit. I'm also going to throw a little bit of the E70s into some of the leaves because, like I said, I just love that shade for fall, and I thought it would be fun to have some of that just kind of in the other little pops of color throughout the card as well. Then I'm going to go back, like I said, to that E triple, E00, and E11 and do the mouse's tail and feet. I just really wanted them to be more flesh toned and to match the insides of the ears. Then I'm going to change browns. There's a lot of browns on this card, but I was kind of going for that toasty autumnal vibe. So I went with E53, E55, E57, and E59, although I'm kind of split up those colors. So I'm going to do the acorn shells first, and I'm only using the darkest 3 shades for those. So the E59, E57, E55, and then I'm going to move on to my little bird, and I'm going to use brown tones so he can be a sparrow, and I am starting with that E57 for him, blending out with the E55, and I'll also add a little bit of that E53 in there for a nice highlight on the top of his head, the top of his wings, and down the back of his body. And I did forget to do the acorn cap that is in his hand, so I just colored that in quickly. And then I'm going to lighten up this combo a little bit more for the acorn nut and use E51, E53, and E55 for those. They're super tiny, so they're real quick and easy to color. So I'm moving on to my mushroom stems, and there's quite a few. Well, there's only 4, but 2 of them are rather large. So I'm going to color them all exactly the same though, and I'm using some E40s. I really like the E40s for mushroom stems. I use them pretty often for that because I just think they have that perfect creamy beige shade that just remind me of mushrooms. So I'm using the E40, E41, E42, and E43 for those, and coloring them all the same like I said, and I am shading them with the shadows on the right hand side and the highlight on the left, and that is because they are a little bit tipped toward the right, or at least most of them are. The one of the smaller cluster, the one on the left, is a little bit tipped toward the left, but there is one right up against it on the right, so that would be blocking the light. So I just decided to do it all the same and keep it consistent on the right hand side throughout, using that E43 first and then blending out with the E42, and then I use the E41 and then a little bit of that E40. There's not that much of the E40 on there, but once again, having that nice light highlight emphasizes the shadows, so it just helps, I think, make them look a bit more dynamic. And since they are quite large and prominent on the card, you really want them to look dynamic and have, you know, a lot of texture and interest. So I'm just finishing those up, and then I'm going to add a little bit of that E43 on the tips of that little leaf cluster. I'll also use the E41 to add a tiny bit of highlight to the white spots. I kept the E40 out as well, but I didn't end up using it because it looked light enough. And now we're finally going to move into some more color for the card. So I wanted to have a nice, rich golden yellow. So I'm going the whole gamut here, from a very pale bright yellow to a really rich, almost orangey gold. I'm using Y11, Y13 for that brightness, and then for the golden tones, YR21, YR23, and YR24. And I'm going to do all of the mushroom caps the same. I wanted them to look like it's a little copse of mushrooms, like they're all growing together. So even though they are slightly different styles, some of them, I just wanted it to look more unified. And again, I'm shading them all in the same way with my shadows on the right hand side and the highlight on the left, starting with that YR24 and then blending out with the YR23. I added a little bit of that YR21 in there and then made sure to go over the edge of that YR21, especially with that Y13, because that Y13 is where it really starts to get golden and bright and like sunshiny yellow, which I wanted. So I then blended out the Y13 with a little bit of the Y11, and I really, really love how rich and autumnal this combo looks, and especially for something, again, that is like almost the centerpiece of the card, because they are going to go right in the center. I think it's important that they have a really vibrant pop of color there. So I'm coloring carefully around the white spots. I've showed you in other videos that you can fix it if you get some color into those spots, but since I already shaded them, I wanted to try to avoid getting anything in there if possible. And especially since I was working with yellows don't bleed too much, so it was fairly easy to do. And then I am going to throw a bit of these colors into my fall leaves as well, just to brighten those up again. Again, I wanted that kind of duller autumnal look, but I still wanted little pops of vibrancy in my leaves. Now, obviously, there is not a ton of room for all 5 of those shades, so I really did skip around. The colors blend a lot better when you're coloring super tiny things. So I think I started with the YR24 or the YR23 and then jumped straight to the Y13 to blend that out, and that worked well for me. Like in those smaller areas, the colors just are more saturated in that small confined space, and so they just blend a little bit better than they would if you were coloring something large like the mushroom. So I'm moving on to my oranges, and again I wanted to go with more of those rusty tones, that more autumnal orange. So I went with YR12, YR14, and YR18. I did the little bird's beak. I also did some of my leaves there, throwing in that shade. And then I also did the stripes on my worm, every other stripe, with just the YR14 and the YR12 for him. And again, I just wanted little pops of that here and there. This one branch of leaves, I decided I wanted to have more of those orange tones, so I colored that a bit more heavy with that and almost went completely over the yellows. I used R20 to add some rosy cheeks to my critters and threw a little bit of that into the ears. And then for the flowers, I decided to go in a completely different direction. So everything so far has been really rich and warm. And I wanted something that would break that up, but only in a small amount. And also something that would tie into my sky. So I decided to go with these almost periwinkle blues using B00, B41, and B45. And I only used a touch of that B45 because I didn't want the flowers to get too dark, especially the tiny ones that are in the squirrel's arms. So just a touch of that, blended out with the B41, and then I used that B00 to really lighten those up with a nice highlight. Then I have just a little bit of greenery on this scene, and I used G94 and G99 for that. Again, going with something that was more fall toned. It's almost like an olive green. It's a little bit more bright than olive, but even that G99 is called olive, so it is more of an olive toned. I would say it's a cool toned olive, as opposed to like the YG90s. Those are more of a warm toned olive. So I thought that the cool tone olive would go well with the blue flowers since they're cool toned as well. And that finished up the coloring, so as soon as I was done, I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. Moving on to my background, I took a piece of Bristol Smooth Surface cardstock and die cut that with the Hello Bluebird Nesting Decal A2 dies. I used the 3rd largest in that die set. And I'm going to watercolor a background. I did a watercolor background earlier this week and I really enjoyed doing it. So I decided to just do the same technique. I'm going to do it on a little bit of a different kind of card. I'm doing it in a landscape position instead of portrait like the other one. And I also am not like die cutting the grass. I'm just going to watercolor the grass straight on here. And I'm using Stormy Sky and a little bit of tumbled glass for the sky. So I'm just watercoloring with Distress Oxide Inks. And I'm making sure that that color is kind of blotchy. I really prefer that look. It just looks more natural to me. I don't like things to be too particular on my watercolor backgrounds. And then I'm going to use Rustic Wilderness for the grass, just the one shade, and I'm going to lighten up certain areas of that just by adding more water to that ink and, you know, just blotching it on here and there again like I did with the sky. And then I decided that there was too much white space on the edges as opposed to the top and bottom. So I'm just pulling that color out a little bit. I did get a little bit of green mixed in there, so I just added a bit more of the Stormy Sky. And then I didn't like the lines on the edges, so I'm just going to use my paintbrush to smooth those out a little bit. And then I will set this panel aside to dry completely. Once it has, I'm going to pop it in my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment, and I'm using one from the Banner Blessings stamp set from Hello Bluebird, and it says, "Grateful for you always." I'm stamping that in VersaFine Onyx Black ink, and I will stamp that down twice just to make sure it's nice and bold and legible and is going to stand up against all the images that I'll be adding to that scene. And then I'm doing an insert for the inside of my card, and I decided to do it out of Bristol as well, just so the insert would match the focal panel in the tones of white that they are. The Bristol is a little bit more of an off-white. And you can see that I got a little bit of a smudge on there with my walnut ink from Lawn Fawn that I was stamping in. So there was a little bubble in that stamp as I laid it down, and I didn't realize. I thought it was just up high enough where it wouldn't touch the cardstock. So I went ahead and stamped it out a second time so it would be the darkness level that I wanted. And then I just grabbed my Tombow Mono sand eraser and worked that over that little spot on the cardstock very gently in a bunch of little layers until it had peeled off the top layer of cardstock. But if you're very gentle, you can't even tell. It really just looks like nothing was ever there. So definitely a great tip for those little ink smudges. So then I'm going to my pattern paper, and I'm using the Echo Park Our Baby 6x6 pad again. I really like the fallish tones in the color palette for this paper pad, and one of the patterns has these leaves all over it that I thought would be perfect for fall. So I die cut that with the second largest of the Nesting Decal A2 dies, and I'm going to layer that on my card. So first thing I'm going to do is add that insert to the inside. And the cardstock that I'm using for my card base is called Ground Coffee, I believe, from Lawn Fawn. I'll have everything linked down below. And then I am going to add my pattern paper to the front of that, so we have that nice border on the edges. I've added some foam tape to the back of my focal panel to give that a bit of lift, and then I will line that up in the center of that pattern paper piece and just pop that down. So again, we get like a double layer of the colors on the edges. And then I can bring in my images, and I'm going to start with this large mushroom cluster and put that just to the left of the sentiment. Kind of put it at a little bit of an angle there. And then I'm going to add my red squirrel down at the bottom left corner. And I didn't want to cover up the flowers at the base of the mushrooms, so I'm just being careful to arrange him a little bit tipped back as well so that you can see both of the clusters of flowers. Then I'll add the other mushrooms to the right of the first one and a little bit lower And then the mouse is going to balance out the squirrel on the right hand side of the card. I really like things to have balance in my scenes. So yeah, I just wanted him to kind of overlap into the white edge of that focal panel, just like the squirrel's tail does. So then I have a few little images that I wanted to go down at the bottom of the scene, including this little worm that I'm going to place by the smaller mushroom cluster. And then I wanted the bird to go in between him and the squirrel, but I didn't want to add the bird just yet because I knew that some of the leaves would need to be tucked behind him. So I'm using him as a placeholder as I figure out where I want things to go. I'm going to put this more rusty orange cluster of leaves up between the two mushroom clusters, and the bird will go down in front there. Just making sure I have it tilted at the angle that I want before that glue dries. And then I wanted this leaf with the acorn on it to go near the squirrel. So I put that kind of tucked behind the bird's tail. And then I have a little cluster of acorns as well that I'm going to add again over on the left hand side to balance out the mouse's tail that kind of swirls down in front. And then I can add my bird where I want him to go. And then all that's left is a couple of leaves that I want to have blowing through the sky. So I'm going to put one of the larger ones up in the top left corner, and then the other three will kind of accent the sentiment. So I am just kind of giving those a little twist and a turn so they're all facing in different directions. And then this last one, I wasn't sure if I wanted it to overlap the mushroom. I kind of liked that look, but it felt like there was too much empty space above the word grateful, so I kind of shifted it a little bit more to the right. And just messed with that last one over on the left as well. And then I wanted to add, of course, some Stickles, and this time I decided to go with some platinum. I really like to pull this one out in the fall. I think it looks really nice, especially on brown tones. So I'm adding just the tiniest touch to the edge of my acorns, and I'll also add a little bit to each of my colored leaves. This one does cover up your coloring, so I just want to add a little flash of it here and there. I don't want to coat the entire leaf with that. Just a little touch to add that bit of glimmer on the tips or down the center, wherever I decide to add it. And then I wanted to use my regular favorite Stardust Stickles to just kind of add something to those white spots on the mushroom caps. So I'm dabbing that over the white spots, and then I also decided to add it to the centers of my flowers. So that is going to finish up this card. I really think it looks really festive and very fall-esque. So I hope that you enjoyed it too. There's another peek at the inside. If you did like it, please be sure to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe if you haven't already. You can ring that notification bell if you want to be alerted whenever I post a new video, which is every Monday and Friday. All of the products that I use will be listed and linked for you in the description bar below in case you'd like to pick up anything for yourself. And if you'd like to keep watching, I have 2 more fall videos that you may also enjoy. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I will see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.